Welcome to POTUS 2016, where we call the presidential horse race and pour cold hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. The very first U.S. Vice President, John Adams, said of his office, "In this I am nothing, but I may be everything." So just in case, millions of us did watch Senator Tim Kaine debate Governor Mike Pence. Of course, we also wanted to see how they would defend a couple of unusually unpopular presidential candidates. With our guests, we will try to spot the gems and the fool's gold in their debate. But first, the polls, which now are at a gallop. Yes, time for the horse race. Who won the VP debate on Tuesday? CNN's post-debate poll, and it's early, so it's not entirely scientific, but it reports that Mike Pence finished first in the judgment of 48% of respondents versus Tim Kaine at 42%. But throughout the debate, as noted by projection guru David Rothschild, the betting markets on the overall race didn't move, which may be an indication of the slight impact the VP debate will have on the upcoming election. Clearly not good news for Trump on the heels of his disastrous debate performance last week. New polling shows a significant boost for Clinton. According to the CNN ORC polling of likely voters taken through Sunday, Clinton jumped 4 points during the last week and is now at 47%, running 5 percentage points ahead of Trump. Real Clear Politics four-way polling averages now show Clinton with a 4 percentage point lead overall. Similarly, Huffington Post's curated polling averages for a two-way race show Clinton with a 6 percentage point lead. Clinton, it is worth noting, has consistently led in polling averages. Polling also showed that the Clinton updraft is coming from men. Her 22% deficit to Trump has shrunk to just 5%, and she's also gaining among independents who now lean in her favor after heavily tilting towards Trump in early September. And with each day that fades, so do Trump's opportunities to turn the race around, a fact made abundantly clear over the weekend as news of Trump's near billion-dollar 1995 tax losses became public and continue to drive the news cycle. CNN ORC polling has found that more than 8 in 10 voters consider paying taxes a civic duty rather than a burden that one should avoid by paying as little as possible. Those results came in before Trump's recent tax news, though. The noose appears to be tightening around Trump's electoral map as well. According to recent Quinnipiac polling, Clinton has improved her position in 3 battleground states, moving ahead in Florida and North Carolina and bolstering her lead in Pennsylvania. Then again, there is another Trump-Clinton debate Sunday, so anything can happen. But today, let's deconstruct the vice presidential debate with our guests. Joining us, Greg David, columnist and blogger for Crain's New York Business. Greg directs the Business and Economics Reporting Program at the Graduate School of Journalism at the City University of New York, too, and understands real estate and taxes, which is real useful this week. Also a regular at our table, Fordham University political scientist Christina Greer, author of Black Ethnics, Race, Immigration, and the Pursuit of the American Dream. And via Skype from Virginia, our expert in political rhetoric, Jim Kuypers, Virginia Tech professor and author of, among many works, Purpose, Practice, and Pedagogy in Rhetorical Criticism. Welcome back to the program, all of you. Thank you very much for coming in. And let me start with a clip from the debate and find out what you all make of this interaction between Pence and Kaine about Trump's taxes.
His tax returns that showed he went through a very difficult time, but he used the tax code just the way it's supposed to be used, and he did it brilliantly.
How do you know that? You haven't seen his tax return.
Because he's created a business that's worth billions of dollars today.
How do you know that?
All right. Well, he won on points there, Kaine, probably. Not style points because he was Mr. Interrupty like he was for most of the debate, but he got the point across that Trump isn't revealing his tax returns.
Right. So, this is a really important development. Whoever sent the New York Times these infamous 3 pages picked just the right tax return, the seminal tax return in which Donald Trump took a $915 million write-off. We don't know exactly what for, but remember, we do know that his investment in the Plaza Hotel was disastrous and he lost an enormous amount of money. He had to sell the Trump shuttle airplane because it was losing money, and probably there's a big write-off in the casino business. So what this does show is that Trump's mantra that he is a very successful businessman is not exactly true.
Well, Christina, go ahead.
And similarly, beyond the, Trump is making so much of his name, especially with a large percentage of his poor supporters, which is, you're a loser, I'm a winner. If you vote for me, then you'll automatically become a winner because I am so wealthy, even though, we have no idea how much is in his checking account, and these tax returns have shown something else. But also a large part of Trump and Pence, part of their strategy is to say that Hillary Clinton is untrustworthy. And so if Kaine can make this argument sort of on the road without Hillary Clinton, this also taps into their strategy, which is to say he's actually possibly not trustworthy either, and that levels the playing ground in some ways, especially for two highly unpopular presidential candidates.
And Jim, what was the framing there on both sides as you saw it in that short clip?
Well, the framing involved is really much larger. There were two main frames that were going on throughout the debate through which you could view that one exchange. There was the whole idea of Kaine saying things are getting better, and of course Pence saying things have been getting worse. But that's old news. That most debaters will do that. The real news, though, was Kaine putting through this idea of Trump as indefensible. You cannot defend Trump, and then Pence being put on the defensive with that, saying he is defensive, and to the degree that Kaine is successful with this framing would be to the degree that Pence was hurt, and of course Trump would be hurt in the debate.
Right. One of the things, Christina, that Pence did later in that exchange was to say, do you not take the tax deductions that you're entitled to? Mm-hmm. Do you think it's not landing that way out in America?
Well, I think, the hardcore Trump supporters believe that Trump is a genius, right? As Mayor Giuliani has been going on television trying to convince everyone. So
a genius for using the tax code so shrewdly.
Exactly, to his advantage,
and
right?
legally.
And I think that there is a segment of a Trump supporter, or the Trump supporters, who think that this is great, right? And they're not sort of making
everybody else. I mean, the Trump supporters are the Trump supporters.
For some undecideds, and I think Hillary Clinton planted the seed, and Kaine followed up, and we'll probably see this on Sunday, and then subsequently in the last debate on the 19th, which is paying taxes is sort of an amorphous thing for a lot of people. We always talk about taxes, but we never really get to the bottom of it. Every 4 years, it kind of comes up, and we have like death taxes and property taxes, but we never have a substantive debate. What I think Hillary Clinton and Kaine are effectively doing are saying taxes pay for very basic things. Right? You may not understand the complex tax code of real estate and finance and airplanes, but taxes pay for schools, roads, military, veterans, things that you probably care about and that are linked to your day-to-day life.
And that CNN ORC poll finding that 8 in 10 people said paying taxes is a patriotic duty and people shouldn't avoid it. Really?
Well, you know what I think this has done is, and I didn't understand the extent of it either before we all started obsessing about this. We all know that real estate is favored in the tax code. It's favored for all those of us who buy a house because we get the mortgage deductions. But I don't think we realized how much it's favored for real estate people. And even before, the Times got these pages, Jim Stewart in the Times has done some really good pieces about how favored real estate is. And to your point, I just wonder, and I don't know whether this is true, that this has planted the seeds for more aggressive tax reform when someone wins.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of people are realizing, as Hillary said the other day, how rigged the system is.
All right, we'll see if either of them come forward with actual proposals to reform the advantages that real estate developers get in the tax code. Now let's look at a clip from the debate about police bias.
But Senator, please, enough of this seeking every opportunity to demean law enforcement broadly by making the accusation of implicit bias every time tragedy occurs.
Elaine, people shouldn't be afraid to bring up issues of bias in law enforcement. And if you're afraid to have
I'm not afraid to bring that up.
If you're afraid to have the discussion, you'll never solve it.
So, Professor Kuypers, how about the framing there? You think Tim Kaine practiced that language about being afraid to confront it?
I think everything that Tim Kaine did during this debate was very well practiced. It was very scripted. Pence was trying to personalize the relationship with the police, and Kaine was trying to make it more abstract and looking at it as a system. And it really is the person's point of view, which one of those they're going to buy into. But it does go back to the basic framing that is going on in terms of, are things getting better or are things getting worse? And you know.
And Christina, I thought that as that exchange went on, and we don't see it in that clip, but Pence started out by saying, police are the best among us, and don't accuse the whole police institution of systemic bias, implicit bias. It's just not fair. But by the end of the exchange, I thought he did acknowledge implicit bias, the value of community policing, and that implicit bias needed to be addressed.
Right. And so the interesting thing about Pence is I thought he started incredibly strong at the beginning of the debate, but he essentially was either frustrated or tired, and so his skill set diminished just a little bit, as we saw with that Mexican thing, as he sort of waves off things later on in the debate. I think that Pence has a really fine line to thread, because there is a structural, institutional, systemic issue that needs to be made, and I think he's savvy enough and intellectual enough to have it, but that's not necessarily on his talking points. And so it's easier to say, if you raise a question about the police, you are anti-police. And as Kaine essentially argued, it's like, that's not what we're saying at all. And if we can be our higher selves, we can actually have this conversation, which I think Pence sort of had to rise to that occasion and agree with.
Do you think we learned that Pence has a kind of higher self that he could rise to on this issue, compared to, say, Rudy Giuliani, who's only going to say, "Oh, you don't, you don't pay attention to black-on-black crime and things like that."
Right.
That's a pretty low bar, isn't it?
Right. I was about to say, Rudy Giuliani, I think, has proven to us in the 21st century, and especially in 2016, that he is just not to be trusted on many issues, just in an intellectual and thoughtful way. I mean, he sort of has his talking points and he's doubling down on them.
Right.
I think Pence, in some ways, whether he's setting himself up for 2020 or whether he just realizes he can only go but so deep into the abyss, he was actually trying to make a substantive argument and realizing that it goes against his talking points.
Now, even if you didn't see the debate, you could see from those two clips that there was a certain kind of pattern that was set up here. Tim Kaine would go after Pence with something that was just unacceptable that Trump has said at one time or another, and Pence was put in the box of either having to defend the indefensible or pretend that Trump didn't say what he clearly said. So maybe this was the point of the entire Tim Kaine strategy. Right away after the debate, the Clinton campaign came up with this ad.
Let's start with not praising Vladimir Putin as a great leader. Donald Trump and Mike Pence have said he's a great leader. And Donald Trump has
Putin's been a very strong leader for Russia.
Vladimir Putin has been a stronger leader in his country than Barack Obama has been in this country.
Donald Trump, on the other hand, didn't know that Russia had invaded the Crimea.
Oh, that's nonsense.
He's not going to go into Ukraine. All right, you can mark it down, you can put it down, you can take it anywhere
he's
you
already
want.
there, isn't he?
Donald Trump has said it, deportation force. They want to go house to house, school to school, business to business, and kick out 16 million people. And I cannot believe...
You're going to have a deportation force.
Donald Trump and I would never support legislation that punished women.
Should the woman be punished for having an abortion?
There has to be some form of punishment.
More nations should get nuclear weapons.
Don't put
try to
words into
defend
my
that.
mouth. Well, he never said that.
Wouldn't you rather, in a certain sense, have Japan have nuclear weapons?
Saudi Arabia nuclear weapons?
Saudi Arabia, absolutely.
Donald Trump said keep them out if they're Muslim. Mike Pence put a program in place to keep...
Total and complete shutdown of Muslims.
He is asking everybody to vote for somebody that he cannot defend.
Jim, holy moly, that's the first time I saw that. And they did in like this 2-minute spot what it took CNN hours of post-debate analysis to do with 7 panelists. It's fact check as spot, and they had so much to work with.
Trump is an easy target. He's a contextual speaker. And when you speak contextually, it is very easy to take one line and then apply it to a different context. And that happens to Trump a lot. And most of those one-liners that you see Trump say in that ad are lifted from a different context and put into another. So it does make him an easy target, and that's part of what Kaine was trying to do throughout the debate in terms of his numerous attacks, just attack after attack after attack, interruption, attack, interruption, attack. And that did put Pence on the defensive somewhat, and he was pretty good about coming back in terms of staying focused on not every single one of Kaine's assertions, but basically choosing one and then attacking that.
Are you saying that in your view that ad is misleading because it takes Trump out of context and Kaine took Trump out of context to set up that ad?
Yes, I would. And that goes part and parcel with most of political attack ads. They are meant to mislead.
What was misleading there? Do you have an example?
Well, for instance, on the Ukrainian, the Russians aren't in Ukraine. They had already annexed the Crimea, and that's what Trump was specifically referring to there. And the idea under a Trump presidency, they would not move in and take over Ukraine. They would not go in there. And that, if you look at the whole context of that,
into the rest of Ukraine. Do we disagree with this?
I couldn't disagree more.
Oh my goodness, maybe it's a New York-Virginia divide. I don't know, but
In the ABC interview that was disclosed, Trump clearly did not think that Russian troops had ever gone into the Ukraine. Clearly showed he knew nothing about the situation.
or foreign policy writ large.
And it wasn't. I don't think there was a single thing in there that that was taken out of context. Now, it is true that Trump says exactly contradictory things the next day, later that day,
Yes.
etc. But in each case,
and he has walked some of those things back.
but then he doesn't walk them back the next time.
Right.
So I think it's completely wrong to say it's out of context. It's what is appropriate to say is that Trump says so many things.
Right.
He's an easy target for that reason because we have no idea what he believes, which is really true. We have no idea what he believes.
I think, he's a much more difficult target than what we've seen in the past because in many ways he's Teflon. I mean, we have never really seen a candidate who will say one thing on a Monday, the opposite thing on a Tuesday, never apologize on a Wednesday, and double down on Thursday on one or both of those items.
And things that have been historically so unacceptable. But he remains competitive. Jim Kuypers, in our last 30 seconds, how do you think whatever happened at the debate between the vice presidential candidates changes what Clinton and Trump might do Sunday?
I don't think it's going to change too much their overall strategy. I think Trump's going to focus more on what he needed to do in the first debate, which is prepare more and come across as more polished and be able to take advantage of the opportunities that Secretary of State Clinton presents to him during the debate.
All right. And they said that Tim Kaine, if Trump came in underprepared for his debate, Kaine might have actually come in a little bit over-prepared for his.
Whatever that means when we're thinking about leading the free world, I think that that's something that we need to ask ourselves as a nation, someone who's going to really think about these ideas and be excited about them.
Well, the person I watched the debate with was crazed about everything Kaine did. A Hillary supporter for sure, very worried about Trump, but at one point she turned to me and she said, "This is impossible. How can anybody follow the debate?" as they were talking over. But in the end of the day, it's pretty clear that this debate did not fundamentally have a significant impact on this election.
Well, thank you all very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now stick around for some additional vice presidential evidence. Time for evidence-based politics, where we pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. As we've discussed, vice presidential candidates can serve many roles in a campaign: surrogate, attack dog, calming voice, ideological or geographical counterweight. At minimum, though, running mates are expected to deliver their home state. This time, Kane, Virginia, Pence, Indiana. But historically, does this usually happen? Joining us on Skype, Kyle Kopko. He is professor of political science at Elizabethtown College in Pennsylvania and co-author of The VP Advantage: How Running Mates Influence Home State Voting in Presidential Elections. Professor, thank you for doing this. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So, do vice presidential candidates influence voting in home state elections?
Generally, they don't. It's actually a lot of overblown rhetoric, to be perfectly honest. There are certain times whenever we examine the data, though, that they could deliver a home state advantage. That's most likely to occur under two conditions. First, they have to come from a relatively small state, less populous state. And secondly, they have to have a great deal of political experience within that home state. So think of someone like a Joe Biden. You know, Delaware is a very small, rather homogeneous state in terms of its identity, only 3 counties in size. And he was a political institution there, serving many decades, both at the county level government and then United States Senate. So if you have those two conditions in place, that's when we're most likely to observe a home state effect.
And even in that example, am I wrong that Delaware was a reliably blue state anyway, so Biden wasn't picked for that reason?
Exactly right. So Delaware was a very consistent Democratic state. And then the other twist, too, is that small states have relatively few electoral college votes. Any single state that's that size, 3 electoral college votes, isn't really going to play a very big role in deciding the outcome of the election. That's normally larger states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, places like that have much more electoral college votes.
So how does your theory apply to Tim Kaine or Mike Pence? Certainly they're both very well-known political institutions in their states. They've both been governor. They've both also been in Congress, Pence in the House, Kaine in the Senate, currently in the Senate. So are they likely to swing their states or have an influence, a few points in one direction or another? Because those are both swing states in recent elections.
So it's a good question. The evidence points to the conclusion that it's unlikely. And think about it this way. You would need to have a vice presidential candidate that's so popular and is so well connected to voters within a state that they're able to change their hearts and minds, where they're at least going to subjugate their feelings for the presidential candidate, or at least make the vice presidential candidate evaluations equal to or greater than the presidential candidates. That's really going to be a tall order if you think about it. It's going to be exceptionally difficult for someone from Virginia or someone from Indiana to have that type of personal connection with a wide range of voters in all different geographic areas of that state to make them behave in that manner. So it's just unlikely in 2016.
And again, each of those candidates brings other things to the ticket. They're both fathers of Marines for Trump and Clinton who don't have military backgrounds, and you could go down a list of other things: temperament, the kind of match that they bring to the ticket, the kind of balance in various respects. But at least can you say in these cases and in general that vice presidential candidates do no harm in their home states, especially if they're swing states?
That's right. Generally, I think that is the case, because if they were damaged goods, so to speak, they wouldn't have won elected office within those states to begin with. So they're going to have some level of popularity at the very least. And then to your point, too, there is some value in helping to indirectly frame the presidential candidates. This is where ticket balancing comes into effect. So it might affect the perception of voters whenever evaluating presidential candidates, but they're not really being motivated directly by the vice presidential running mates.
Although Pence, I think one of the reasons that he accepted this when a lot of Republicans would not have accepted a spot on a Trump ticket is that he was becoming unpopular in his state. The analysts said he might lose his reelection bid for governor, so he had reason to roll the dice on something else, and he's popular nationally with the religious right wing of the Republican Party. But I guess he's not unpopular enough to hurt him in Indiana.
That's right. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of folks are going to be evaluating first and foremost the presidential candidate relative to the vice presidential candidate. It would have to take someone who's really unpopular relative to the presidential candidate in order for them to affect the vote choice at a national level. Based on our estimates, evaluations of presidential candidates have at least 3.5 times the weight compared to evaluations of vice presidential candidates. So again, it's the presidential candidate that's really influencing vote choice.
We only have a little time left. I'm thinking of all kinds of other potential examples. Sarah Palin probably hurt John McCain's ticket measurably, but not in Alaska. And who else would you point to, positive or negative, from history?
There's the example of Lyndon Johnson in 1960 delivering Texas for the Democratic ticket. But once we dig into the data, the evidence shows that he really wasn't popular enough in his home state of Texas to deliver its electoral college votes, or the rest of the Old South for that matter. What's really interesting, using 1960 American National Election Studies data from the University of Michigan, what we find is that Lyndon Johnson was actually the most popular outside the South. So the closer one gets to his home state of Texas, the less favorably he is viewed. In fact, there's a number of open-ended responses in the 1960 survey data that suggests that voters viewed him as being opportunistic, someone who is ambitious, who might not necessarily put the interests of the South at the forefront. So our data suggests that even there, the most purported example of a home state advantage probably is just a myth.
Real quick, Al Gore, he didn't win his home state of Tennessee when he ran for president. Did he help Clinton win it when he ran for vice?
So in terms of his home state, probably not. But here's the really interesting thing. This gets at the indirect effects again. You had a new Democratic candidate during this period of time, 1992, and Bill Clinton. So he helped to reframe the Democratic ticket, these two young Southern candidates running for office. And that image, that message, I think, is what really carries it at the end of the day.
Thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And that's POTUS 2016 for today. We're here each week at this time, calling the presidential horse race and pouring cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. Most places, there's just a few days left to register. Let he without sin cast the first stone, but don't wait for a democracy without sin to cast your first ballot. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.